you feel uncomfortable for some reason, don't, but otherwise, I think it'll be a nice informal presentation / conversation. So I'm Dean Qualified with the Data Group at the World Bank. Super thrilled to be sharing this session. A couple of the papers I've seen in earlier stages, so I'm very excited to see them again, but it looks like 4 fascinating papers on a topic that I don't have to persuade any of us in the room that it's important and that's some land quality and land measurement issues. I will stop us pretty hard at the 30-minute mark, just so that we have 30 minutes slotted for each paper, although do we have the 4 paper? Well, we'll see. Okay, good. So I will give the 5-minute marker when you are at the 15-minute point in the presentation, and then you can just sort of, the speaker can just modulate how much feedback they want, but you'll get the end now at the 20-minute mark from. So why don't I turn it over to our first paper, which is the worst title of the day, Making Measurement Great Again. But I think the paper will make up for that quite handily. So it's the use of sensors and scanners for rapid, high-quality data on land. The presenter was Sydney Corley from the World Bank. Sydney's a senior economist here, and a team member of the Living Standards Measurement Study, which is the World Bank's flagship household survey program based in the Development Data Group. So Sydney, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we won't dwell on the title too much. It was, I have regrets, but hopefully not about the content. So in the context of this presentation, I'll be thinking about land more in an agricultural sense and other various different land themes. But when we're thinking about data on land, we really, especially for agriculture, in order to understand agricultural systems and the role of land, the importance of land, as well as to evaluate the impacts of different interventions, really need improvement in data, in the availability of the data, but the quality, timeliness, and cost effectiveness. And when we're thinking about data on land, here talking about land quantity and quality, a lot of this data comes from household surveys, household agricultural surveys, and these often rely on subjective measures that can be prone to measurement error. When we're thinking of land area, which I know probably most of you in this room are familiar with some of the literature around documented bias in farmer-reported land area estimates, which we'll show again here. So there are known subjective biases there, and in land quality is a little less evidence around kind of pitfalls and subjective assessments of soil health, with little intra-household or intra-farm variation in subjective estimates or assessments, as well as weak correlations observed with objective measures of soil parameters. And at the same time, we have digital geo-referenced geospatial soil data that can be integrated with survey data, but it's not necessarily the case that geospatial data is of the resolution needed to answer some specific questions. So this essentially points at the need for better methods for data collection around these domains, preferably with in situ or in-field tools that could be used in a scalable fashion in the context of household surveys or operational projects. And so the LSMS team, as part of the 50 by 30 initiative and in partnership with the Agriculture and Food Practice Group at the bank, recently implemented a methodological study, particularly around these land quality and quantity questions. So we implemented the Uganda class study, as we call it, the Climate, Land Area, and Soil study, where it was designed explicitly around this objective of testing and validating innovative methods around climate, soil health, and land area. So we're looking at assessing the accuracy or the data quality with respect to a benchmark measure where that's available, and then also looking at the trade-offs between, for each method that we're testing, around quality, but also the cost effectiveness and the scalability. So not necessarily that we're looking for the most accurate measure, because if that measure is not feasible to be implemented in a survey context, it's of little use to us. So in some cases, this is maybe a second best, right? There's a balance there. So in this Uganda study, we had two elements. One was a household survey element where we visited sample households multiple times over the course of one agricultural season. And this is where the measurement of soil health and land area were conducted. And then we also had a community level weather center component. I won't go into that for this presentation, but happy to discuss after. Our sample was constructed of 900 households. So these are all maize growing households across 75 rural enumeration areas in 5 districts in eastern and northern Uganda. And we designed it in such a way that we have direct comparison across the different methods used for land area and soil health, which I'll elaborate on in a moment. But in each household, we randomly selected one maize plot, and on that plot, all of the methods were conducted. We have direct. This data is fresh. We just finished data collection in March this year, so we're working through it. And I will be focusing much more on the land area component for this because our soil data is still under analysis for our benchmark measure. So I'll give you a teaser as to what that is looking like, but spoiler, there's not that many results yet. Yeah, so let's get into the land area. So I think, I take for granted a little bit that many of you in this room are familiar with some of the methodological research that's been done on land area measurement. I know that several in the room have done this type of research. And kind of the punchline is that there's really cross-country evidence of systematic bias in farmer estimates of the area. And this has been shown to have implications on productivity estimation and different agricultural relationships, right? So there's error, and that error matters for many policy questions. So the LSMS team, along with many other researchers, have undertaken methodological work to validate the use of handheld GPS units, like you see in this picture. So like a Garmin against what is kind of broadly known as the benchmark measure, which is a compass and rope that were manual. But essentially, confidence was built in the use of these handhelds, and many survey operations adopted these at national scale. All of the LSMS thesis surveys use them. But it's not without challenge, let's say. There are still some impediments to adoption, despite understanding the benefits in terms of data quality that are gained by using these devices. So there's a couple of hurdles. One is the cost, right? If you're going to implement this, you have to buy this separate device. It's, I would say, starting at around 300 for a reasonable unit. So you could go up in price. And procurement could be a challenge, especially if you're thinking about a national survey operation where you need a really high quantity of these devices. It can take a long time. You don't often have, it's a very scarce resource. And then the other, on the flip side of that, is there is inevitably a period where you need to conduct data cleaning to link the survey data with the GPS data, right? Because you have data on two separate devices. No matter how much you train on protocols for naming the GPS, there's inevitably some discrepancies. It takes some effort, and you may lose some observations. So to kind of address these concerns, we worked the LSMS 50 by 30 initiative with the survey solutions team, which is also part of the living standards unit at the bank, to develop a feature in survey solutions, which for those that don't know, it's a CAPI application for interviewing. So we worked with them to develop a feature where you could essentially mimic the functionality of a handheld unit, but directly in the tablet. So you can create a plot boundary and do the measurements by walking the perimeter parts of the plot, and it's directly linked to your survey data, right? It's embedded right there in your plot roster. So you limit that cleaning, any linkage issues, record linkage issues. But it's not a given necessarily that that the measurement will be as accurate as you would get with a handheld. And that's largely because the tablet hardware, you're relying on the embedded GPS sensor in the tablet, which is believed to be a lower caliber than you would get in a handheld GPS device. So we set out to test this. So in the Uganda study, we implemented 4 methods side by side on each plot. One was a self-reported estimate. This was done first, and then we had 3 objective measures that were implemented simultaneously. Where we had the handheld GPS, the Garmin unit. Then we had a tablet that was set up with the survey solutions feature for measurement. And then we had a second tablet, the exact same tablet, the exact same survey feature, survey solutions feature, but in this second tablet, we had linked it with a GPS boosting device, the Garmin Glow, which effectively overrides, it's effectively attaching the Garmin quality GPS sensor to the tablet, overriding the embedded, the internal GPS. All these were done simultaneously. So I'll show you a few results. First is a little bit horrifying. This is the subjective. So you have the self-reported estimate vis-a-vis the Garmin measurement. And I just wanted to show that we do see, right, in line with previous evidence, there's a lot of bias in the subjective estimates. Just to give you a little bit of a reference point before the objective comparisons. Of course, you would hope that these would all fall on the red line, and they clearly do not. So this kind of pushes us, we need a solution for objective measurement when handhelds might not be a possibility. When we compare the tablet-based measurements with the Garmin, we see actually quite similar means, but they are statistically different across the tablets and the handheld. So the means are statistically different, but we see very high correlation among the measurements. So this graph is much more calming to those of us in the room than the first graph. And you see the correlation between the different measures, each of the pairs of measurements is above 0.98. So we're getting really strong correlations here. What's a little bit interesting is we don't see the difference in means between the tablet with the booster and without the booster are not statistically different. Though we do see some decrease in the bias. So in this case, the bias is the absolute deviation from the tablet measurement and the Garmin. We see that at about 10.5% on average when we're using this booster device, and 12% without the booster. So there's a little bit of a decrease there. Those figures are in absolute value terms. When we kind of loosen that constraint and we look at overestimation and underestimation, we see that the tablets are not there's both overestimation and underestimation, right? Which is being washed out a little bit in the means here. We see with the booster, there's a little bit less. We see more of a tendency to underestimate relative to the Garmin, especially on the smallest plots. So sorry, I realized this morning I left up the axis title, but these are plot size quintiles. So the smallest plots on the left-hand side. One other thing that we see a difference in the boosted versus the non-boosted tablet is in the plot boundaries that are captured by these different sources. So these are 3 hand-picked examples, of course, but you see in the red is the Garmin plot outline, the blue is the tablet without a booster, and the green is the tablet with the booster. And you can kind of see here, especially in plot C and also plot A, the first one, using the booster allows for kind of better tracking of plot shape irregularities and fewer issues like in plot C. The informed assumption here is that this is a problem with the accuracy that's embedded in the tablet. So it essentially missed a corner point because it didn't reach the required accuracy to select a point. So we have a lot of work to do on this still. I mean, we have some understanding of the kind of the measurement error itself, but now the next step is looking at the importance or the relevance of this measurement error for different questions. So looking at productivity analysis, for example, we get different productivity estimates, different agricultural relationships, and maybe even looking at land inequality if we use these different methods to kind of better assess the costs of using a tablet instead of a handheld where that's not feasible. We'll also be looking at seeing if the differences in the plot boundaries has any implication for remote sensing applications like yield estimation. So that is next on our step. I'm going to very quickly give you a teaser of the soil health work. And our goal here is essentially, ideally for us, we would like to identify and validate an in-field tool that would allow high quality, rapid, high resolution soil data in the context of a survey. So we tested 5 methods side by side. Again, one is the self-reported subjective assessment. Then we have we're working with ECROP on laboratory analysis, which is our benchmark. So they're doing conventional and spectral analyses. That's what's currently ongoing. So we'll impede the punchline here. But we also implemented analysis with a pollen test kit. So this was done in regional labs. So we're getting closer to the field. Studies in Uganda, the lab analysis in Nairobi. This pollen test kit was done in regional laboratories in Uganda. And then in the field directly, we used a low-cost pH meter and the AgroCare scanner, which this would be kind of thinking about this practically. If the promises of this tool are proven to produce, I mean, if the quality is proven to be sufficient, this would be really game-changing for soil data because it allows for very rapid analysis. You could do it in the field. There's minimal soil processing time, and you get results effectively as soon as you connect to the internet. So the data quality issue is the outstanding issue, and actually we wanted to test the implementation feasibility. That part was very satisfying, I would say. So I can show you a very quick comparison of the 2 methods we do have. So neither of which is the benchmark. It's the important part. But basically we see, oops, oh yeah, sorry. We do see statistically different means across these 2 measures for the majority of key soil parameters. And you can see by looking at the distribution of soil pH across different methods, there are clearly differences in the distributions, which will likely have implications for analyses and potentially fertilizer recommendations, et cetera. So we will be comparing these. The next step is comparing these to the benchmark of the ECROP analysis, and we'll also be comparing them to geospatial soil products, so the soil grids and ICA soil map, which we've done previously, but this will give us another context, and it'll be a segue into my presentation. Yeah, and then similar to the land area, we'll be focused on kind of assessing the importance of these differences that we do see. And ultimately, the goal would be to develop an improved digital soil map for the relevant area that's calibrated, so using a digital soil product, but calibrating that based on our ground samples that are collected in the context of a household survey. So I will leave it here with some final thoughts and future work. The main punchline, I'm sure you're not at all surprised, is that methods do matter for the measurement of land. Your big takeaway for the day. But we see a lot of promise with the new features that might be more, maybe fewer barriers to adoption for objective land area measurement. Soil, we see clear evidence that methods matter. The takeaways are being formulated. So from here, we'll kind of work on this research side, this methodological side, and then ultimately translating these findings and our recommendations for best practices into some usable tools and products for survey practitioners and implementers so that these can be scaled up. And this may be done following replication of this kind of study in other contexts as needed.
Super. Thanks so much, Sydney. And I may have hurried you a little bit too much, but we do have 9 minutes here for Q&A or for discussion. I'll look, yeah, please, right, thank you.
Joe, I think. I want to ask one question. Is about the cost and benefit of each methods. You compare different methods for the ocean. How long time will it take a surveyor to survey an ocean using different methods? Because I want to replicate it in China and measure the ocean.
And maybe I'll go ahead and introduce yourself and maybe.
I'm a PhD candidate from Beijing University. Currently work on agriculture.
Perfect, thank you. Why don't I pull 2 or 3 questions? Did you read?
Yeah. Alessandro Tupeta, Stockholm University. Do you think about those measures as complements or substitutes? I mean, because then we may use different methods like factor models or like.
I think the answer is going to differ for the 2, but there's some.
Yeah, I do a home paper on EPCC about how people handle these tools. It also creates some systematic environments. So I think it's how this can be addressed in implementation.
You mean like instrument protocol?
No, also different people use it. So
Yeah.
you have different skill.
Why don't I pull just those 3 questions there, Sydney, and why don't you respond to those, but leave a chunk for
Sure.
another round.
Yeah, sure. No, they're great questions, actually. I'm going to start with the substitutes versus complements. I think it's a really good question, and I think Dean alluded to this. I think they do differ for the land area and the soil. The soil, I would see them as substitutes because, I think you're getting a different. I think it would be a bit more confusing to have confusing information in this case. Whereas the land area side, there's been a lot of work done actually, leading this. Also, if I am doing some of this, I believe, but essentially, our recommendation is actually using an objective land area measurement in addition to a subjective area measurement, because the subjective area measurement can be kind of leveraged in imputation of missing GPS measurements, for example, and it is shown to be kind of informative in this. Essentially, kind of creating an imputed objective measure has shown to be pretty effective, because inevitably in some of these objective measurements of land area, you're going to have missing values because they're too far away, or you could have refusal over, if boundaries are disputed, et cetera. So there will be missingness, and the self-reported can be useful in filling those gaps. Yes, on the time for area measurement. So I think on this one, what is interesting is that the difference in time required using the tablet or the GPS there isn't really a notable difference in the time required. The difference, because you're walking, it's the same functionality essentially, right? So, and in fact here they did them together. They did it at once in the case of this study. But the subjective is of course much faster, much cheaper. You don't have to travel to the plot, and the traveling to the plot is really what can become the most time intensive. In terms of duration for measurement, I'm trying to remember exactly what the numbers are, but it's of course going to vary with plot size. I think our average, not for this study, but for a group of 3 studies that we did, was around 15 minutes to do this, but it depends on your plot size. But in terms of comparing the 2, it's negligible between the objective measures, except where the kind of the broader benchmark of the compass and rope measurement. This one is exceedingly long. It takes a long time to measure.
So in many countries, the compass may have many plots. So 15 minutes for one plot or 1 hour.
Well, don't hold me to this 15. It depends on the time, but this would be a plot based. But essentially, the time that it takes is the time it takes to walk around the edge. So it will depend also on the terrain. If it's really bushy, you need to kind of clear some things around the boundary. Yeah, but I'm happy. I can also point you, we did a little bit of work on analyzing the time, and I can point you to some resources for that. The interviewer effects. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. So for these methodological studies, the enumerators are trained really quite well on careful protocols for these. We have very careful protocols in terms of how they should hold the device relative to their body and the kind of the speed at which they should walk. And we haven't actually done any studies internally, I don't think, about kind of replicating the same measurement with different enumerators. That would be an interesting one to do, but we haven't, as far as I know.
I'm telling more about systematic. Try to avoid systematic bias, right?
Yeah.
To use another systematic bias. If you walk around a small parcel, maybe it's very easy to capture every corner. If you walk a big parcel and very irregular, maybe you create bigger measurement error. So it's clearly to the size. You will talk about it. Yeah, okay, then. So the training will take account of how efficient across different types of size.
Does seem like there'd be appetite in these kind of papers when talking about costs. So obviously physical costs, time costs, but then the cost of sloppy implementation of protocols or something like that. And that last one probably isn't embedded in the experiment, but it might be worth thinking creatively about that. Or we might have time for one more question if there's a burning. We do have time for one more question. Were you about? Yeah, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I was about to drop it because you said like burning. So mine is just not burning, but I just want to understand because it's on soil health. So if you have a pickup photo, how do you collect the soil formation? Do you collect at one point or
Yeah, and
at different points?
I skipped for time, but so we followed actually a protocol that was based on the ECREPS LDSF framework. So each of them is composite. We collect from 4 points in the plot and then aggregate them.
Just related to this interview effects thing, I think that in general, it's kind of interesting to think about how scaling up of innovations may be subject to interview effects because the requirements of scale up will differ, right, in accordance with the complexity of the innovation. I think in this particular case, GPS-based technology in particular, we've been using it for 15 years now in several countries, where I think it would be relatively easy to look into that to see whether there are actually any interviewer effects, just even in the large-scale data that we've collected, because the requirements of it in terms of walking around the plot has been the same. So this complexity we're trying to manage, right, in the context of testing these innovations, we have them captured in real data. So actually, if there's any interesting questions around that, we could get to that with fairly low marginal costs. Yeah.
I'm going to flip us over to the next session, but I'm seeing a couple of hands. Please do reach out to Sydney afterwards for some chatting after that. So, Kibron, do you want to come on?
Is that me?
Okay. Yeah, it's the paper measuring land rental market participation.
How do I connect to? Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be flipping over, but the next paper is measuring land rental market participation in smallholder land in smallholder surveys. And the question is, can nudges and listing exercises improve land market participation statistics? So primarily finding that with reports, renting in differs in a way that's inconsistent with land rented out in these household surveys, trying to establish that. And Kibron, would it make sense? Would it make sense if we move to the next one, or will this be quick? Do you think?
I think let's see.
You know what? Okay, I was going to say, it wasn't encouraging, but this looks encouraging. So Kibrom is a senior research fellow at ITHRI in the Development Strategies and Governance Unit. His co-authors are with ITHRI and with Civics.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Ben. Okay, yeah, I was hoping to use some of the science findings to motivate, but now I can't do that because I'm coming first. I'll talk about land rent market participation in smallholder agriculture. This is joint work with Gashau from IFPRI, Jordan from CIVIT, and Samoa from the University of Copenhagen. A lot of people have been working on documenting the progress of land market participation, and Stein and others have shown that land market development in Africa has been growing rapidly, and this is contributing to facilitating land transfer from less productive households to more productive households, or from landless households to from land-rich households to landless households. And this has been shown to contribute to efficiency and also equity gains in the land market landscape. Despite those findings, we think that there have not been many specialized surveys in sufficiently capture the complex interaction in land markets, particularly I think in countries where these markets are embedded within existing cultural and social institutional settings. And this is limiting our understanding of the drivers and patterns of land transaction. For example, one typical pattern that we see in many countries is, including in many household surveys, is we see that there are much more tenants in the survey than landlords. We see that in several countries. And Klaus did a multi-country study showing that, where the number of tenants are much more larger than the landlords, and we also show that in multi-country study, and this is mostly for the case for the LSMS countries. These discrepancies are suggesting that there is some important limitation in land market statistics in Africa. And we think that this is important, of course. Particularly, I think this limitations in data or the limitations in our understanding of the interactions in land markets, limit our understanding of the role of land markets in economic transformation or structural transformation of economies in Africa. And specifically, this is also important because the drivers and source of misreporting or underreporting of land market participation can be important, and also they can generate what we call non-classical type of response or type of bias that affects the inference. For example, think of if we are mostly observing poorer households in our land market data, because we only, or if you think of it, we are observing richer households. That means that most of the microeconomic models on the drivers and benefits from land market participation will be biased in many ways. So what that requires is to understand the whole picture in the land market participation. We need the story and also the details from the tenants and also the landlords. This is particularly important to inform relevant land policies. Now, let's see what may explain the mystery that we are seeing in many data, in many surveys. And that is simply, we have much more land that is rented in, but that is not accounted in on the other side of the market. So what that means is we have much more tenants than landlords. And this is just both at household level and also at the person level of plot.
So we think there are several explanations. We're mentioning, I think I'll focus on 4 explanations here. One could be that landlords are renting back their land to multiple tenants, and in that case, if you do a random sample, we will have more tenants than landlords. This is unlikely to explain the discrepancy we see, because if that is the case, the amount of land should be comparable on both sides of the market, but that's not the case. Secondly, landlords may be systematically unobservably survey sampling frames, or probably not responding to surveys. And this would be the case, for example, if urban households are renting their land to rural households, and then when we do rural household survey, we don't get the urban households who are renting out their land, but we get the rural households who are renting in the land. This is possible, but we haven't seen much evidence, and we're hoping Tyler's team will come up with some evidence to show the differential response rate, at least in urban and rural areas, or among the poorer and richer households, which may explain a bit of that. And the third explanation we think is rented in land or rented out land may be systematically underreported for many reasons, including because enumerators and respondents are more likely to focus on land that is actively managed by household, or because of fatigue and other factors that could reduce the attention to land that is rented out or rented in. And finally, respondents may be reluctant to disclose renting out land. This may be the case in cases or settings where land rental is not encouraged, or is implicitly or explicitly discouraged. Similar to the context where we are studying in Ethiopia, where it's not legally prohibited, but it's discouraged to rent land. And I'm happy to talk about the context if you're interested in the list. And then, so what are we doing here? What we're doing here is we introduced 2 novel survey experiments, which are designed to address the 2 reporting bias or source of reporting bias I mentioned. So first, the first one is what we call a priming experiment, or simply a nudging experiment, where we expose half of the sample to be reminded to fully account for all land, including renting and rent out land, and then the second part of the experiment is we employ a list experiment, or simply what we call the double list experiment, to elicit the true rate of renting out and sharecropping out, and the assumption that this is the sensitive portion that households may not be reluctant to fully disclose their response. Okay, here's the experimental design. So as I said, we have the nudge and the list experiment. So in each village, we randomly assign the farmers into control and treatment group. This is particularly relevant for the nudge. And here are the nudge, or the text that is in the nudge. So in the control group farmers, we encourage the enumerators to draw a simple map of the parcel of the agricultural land the household manages or owns. And then after that, he has to number the parcels and then complete the model. And then, but for the control group, for the treatment group, we explicitly asked the enumerator to ask the farmer to start enumerating the parcels that were rented out or rented in, and then sharecropped in, and then after that, it goes to the both managed and owned by the farmer. And then we also remind them, we ask that the enumerator to remind them, are you sure that there are no more land that is rented in or sharecropped in the household? So this is the simple nudge that we embedded in the experiment. Okay, when it comes to the list experiment, we introduced what's traditionally called a double list experiment technique, which is commonly used to accurately measure responses to sensitive items. And this is done by trying to hide individual responses to sensitive questions by bundling them with other responses to non-sensitive questions. And our design of the list of non-sensitive items follow standard guidance or recommendations where we try to balance the length of the list with the privacy protection. Where if it's too long, it becomes a bit taxing for the household. If it's too short, it becomes problematic to protect privacy. So for this experiment, we randomly assign our sample into two groups. That's group A and group B, by stratifying across the night and also across the village. And then we implement the double list experiment, and I'll show you the table. So this is the list experiment. So we have 4 list exercise or lists. So in the first list experiment, the treatment group is the households are group B, where we have the sensitive question added as an additional force question to the non-sensitive questions. And then in the list experiment 2, we bring that question to group A, but again bundle it with other non-sensitive items. And then in list experiment 3 and 4, we are eliciting or including questions about shared property art instead of renting out. And then we have a similar standard across the two cases. So we are embedding these experiments in a large household survey. It's called Agricultural Commercialization Cluster Survey. This is conducted by IFPRI. The first round was in 2019, and the second round in 2023. And in the 2019 survey, we had about 5,000 households, and this follows standard 3-stage sampling procedure. And then we embed the experiment in the 2023 round. And for that round, we had about 4,000 households. We missed it, I think, the remaining share because of the some parts of it. So here we have some balance. So this is based on the 2023 characteristics, and you can see that most of, I think all of the observable characteristics, household characteristics are balanced. But this is for 2023. You could say, oh, this has been affected by the intervention. So we also test the balance by 2019. Which again holds for all of the observable characteristics we are interested in. So in terms of empirical strategy, this is simple because of the random assignment. We're doing a simple OLS and a difference in difference. So the first equation is a simple OLS that just uses the 2023 data, and then the second equation is simple difference in difference, where we're using the baseline data. And then the remaining equation here is what they call difference in means the symmeter, which is due to estimate the rate of response, the rate of affirmative response to the sensitive item. So here we start with the results. So in the 2019, the outcomes are balanced, and we don't see any difference because that's what we expect. But when you come to 2023, the nudge is making some difference. You could see that, for example, when it comes to renting in, we see that the nudge increases the share of parcels rented in by 1 percentage point. This is significant compared to the base, the mean of the control group. When we aggregate this at the household level, you see that the nudge increases the share of farmers participating in land markets by 4 percentage points from 28% to 32%. And this is combining the rented in and shared property. And again, we don't see, I think what one interesting finding here is we don't see any impact on the share of parcels or the share of households renting out or sharecropping out land. And I think we think this is because the nudge is, we think that this is because of deliberate underreporting of participation in this land market. And here we have more parametric OLS estimates where you can see, I'll focus on the last column. What we see is the net increases the share of parcels rented in and or sharecropped in by about 2 percentage points. And when you come to the household level, you can see this increase to 4 percentage points. This is quite a significant number compared to the mean. But we don't see any impact on the renting out and sharecropping out patterns. And we think this is partly because farmers have strong incentive not to report that, and the NAG is not helping much to address that. Here we have similar difference in difference estimates, although the source of variation is different, but you see a very similar impacts. The NAG increase the share of parcels rented in by 2 percentage points. And then when it comes to household, it becomes 4 percentage points. And we don't see any impact on the rented out. So you might be asking how large and how important are those impacts? What we are seeing in the absence of the nudge, we are seeing that 50% of the parcels would not be observed, or 50% of parcels rented in or sharecropping would not be observed. And what that means is the net increases the share of households participating in renting in and sharecropping by 4 percentage points. This is again, I think a substantial number. It translates to 13 to 14%. And the net was not effective. It was not improving reporting behavior associated with renting out and sharecropping out. And this highlights a bit of the limit of the NAG, or simply households have strong incentives not to disclose that. Okay, I'll go to the list experiment. So in the list experiment, our main method is to estimate the implied rate of renting out and sharecropping out, and we do that parametrically and also non-parametrically. And what we see is that 50% of households are renting out, or we estimate that 50% of households are renting out land. When you compare this with the self-report data, this is quite different. We only have 3% of households participating in renting out land. We have some heterogeneous, and what we see is, as expected, those farmers with large farm size are more likely to participate renting out and sharecropping out. And what's interesting here is the difference between the implied rate of renting out and also the self-reported rate. When you see the implied rate, it's about, for example, it's 9% for the first quintile, 20% for the last quintile. But when you see the self-report data, it's almost like 1% in the first quintile, and then 7% for the last quintile. When you compare this with the sharecrop out, then you see that the renting out response may be more sensitive than the sharecropping out. Partly because I think we think that sharecropping patterns are very common in Ethiopia. So just to summarize, we see systematic omission of rented in and rented out parcels in some way due to several fluid factors that we cannot explain, but the simple degree to this increases the share of households reporting participating in that by 4 percentage point. And then we also show some systematic reluctance in disclosing renting out. Let me stop here, and then happy to explain more if there are questions.
Thanks so much. So let's do the same setup. Let's see if we pull 2 or 3 questions together. Hayan, why don't you go first and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. I'm Hayek, the senior economist in the areas team, the global banks. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's very interesting, and especially I find very very interesting, but also personally, right? That we don't really see the impacts of the past or the block level, but then the very strong, statistically significant impact on household level. So I mean, my question is more like, do you have any, like explanation for it? Because usually, from the econometric viewpoint, right? That say if we aggregate, the data to a higher level, then usually we have a less measurement error, right? That we can, algorithm, with the standard, explanation, for the pseudo analysis or something like that. And whenever we aggregate the household level to the cohort level, then we have a less measurement error. Here we see the opposite pattern. So I just wonder, any another question, that's it.
My question is to do with the fact of underreporting. So I mean, I wonder how much of it is a state eligibility problem, which is that we don't have accurate data on land size, and the state doesn't have accurate data on land size, versus a household underreporting. So what will happen is that, say for example, if a state assume that the land size is A. It's not necessary, or I don't know, I'm asking whether you think households are accurately able to or are aware of the area of their land, or whether they were just different on ground versus what the government records. Because there is a gap, and when we do field work, we see a significant gap between what is really on ground versus what's in a record. So I do wonder whether a lot of this is also a lot of this could just be the fact that there are discrepancies between what's on the ground and what's reported, and therefore you're seeing some gap. Not to say that underreporting is not a problem, because I understand the constraints, but I just wonder if you
Maybe just quickly introduce yourself.
I mean, I worked in a think tank in Mumbai, presenting papers.
Well, one more question then. You are in University. We've done several research of management out in China together with colleagues in Beijing. We have quite similar problems indeed. So it looks quite familiar. But the one explanation we always had was that when we interview households, several of them are not there at the time of the survey because they look off on. They have migrated, so they still have a right to the land and let it out, but we can't interview them. So one way to try to solve it was to try to interview them and to find that they are most likely to be around in China. That's just after the Chinese New Year, before even when they got activities. Just after the Chinese New Year, the chance of finding more in there is largest. So I was wondering whether this might also help to, during your strategy that you exist, because there's no point to survey. But you talk about outsiders, but perhaps not really outsiders, but people living in the cities perhaps. You do not have to be there to kind of be surveyed. So could there be a problem, and would there be a way that it can be solved in your case as well? Or trying to find a time that it's very likely that all of them are there. Could there be an issue? But still, it's quite interesting. It's in the way of doing the existing experiment and matches also for the change case. Some of them actually call elements. So it's really interesting. Simple evaluation.
Let's pull those three and watch take a crack at them.
Yeah, I was mostly, I'm waiting for more questions because I'm not sure if I can explain, but also I would think to have as many questions as possible. So let me start to I think offer some thoughts on what might be happening. So with the nudge, what we're doing is we're estimating impacts at the household level and at the cluster level. You're right that at the parcel level, when you aggregate it, measurement here, the misclassification in this case could be lower, and that could address the attenuation by you could get. But it also, I think it also offers an opportunity for, what do you call, like, for more change, right? You have, I think there's a possibility for the one at that level, you can move it by just renting out one piece of land, right? Whereas, for example, think of having much more land and then 5 parcels, and then when we aggregate it, what we are assuming is we're giving you one when you rent out at least one of them, right? Right? So because of that, there is a bit of mechanical element coming from that, but also you're right that there is also a measurement here can also this classification level can also get smaller. But I think we're finding impacts at both levels. What we're not finding impact is at the rate of renting out and shared property. We're seeing impacts on very similar impacts on renting in and shared property in. What that means is the nudge is reminding people that there is something that is not left over that they could report. But when it comes to renting out land, it's not serving them, because if you're thinking of, if you're strategically hiding something, a reminder is not going to serve. So that's how I would explain. In coming back to your question, in terms of, I don't know, we haven't tried what's happening on the land side, the side of the land, and we could try. Whether that leads to overestimation of overall land or farm side. We haven't tried that, we could try that. And it might be, yeah, I mean, I don't know if, for example, one important question we were wondering, and we haven't addressed so far, is farmers have land certification, and they have land certificates, which sets the amount of land they have. We don't know whether they know that. We don't know, so we haven't tested that, and that's probably something for the LSMS team to see that. But I think one interesting exercise is whether they're making decision better on that or whether on an assumed land side that they know. We haven't tested that, but it's a good exercise. I like the question. I think you're right. I mean, we have seen some of these reasons, and I think it would be interesting to see if creating or changing the time of interview can matter. But one case that we also, I think one of our partners were insisting was the land may be managed by different people, so the person you're getting is maybe a different person who's not handling the rented in land. And so another exercise that would be interesting could be to see if allocation of the questionnaire to people within the household can matter, or whether we can ask all relevant people who might be handling different pieces of land and see if that matters. We haven't done that, and that's probably one avenue to address some of these discrepancies.
Okay, we've used up our 30-minute slot. Shall we look forward to the next presentation? So this is on measurement, air, and farm size. Do nationally representative surveys provide reliable estimates? The presenter today is Stein Holden. Stein's a professor in development and resource economics at the School of Economics and Business at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. All over to you, Stein.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here. I'm excited it's many experts gathered here to can give some good comments on this, I hope, because it got quite strong effects, bigger than we kind of expected in terms of some biases when we looked at these LSMS data from Ethiopia. I'll give you very briefly the main finding, I think, which is kind of easy. What we did was to create balanced panels We had 3 rounds in Ethiopia and 4 rounds in Malawi to look at ownership holding size. We avoided the rental or operational holding things because of a lot of tricky additional things in the data related to that. So we tried to identify all parcels or household plots aggregated to parcels and then to household level to identify ownership holding in each survey round in each country. And we use this balanced data, and mostly we use those where you have the GPS measured or rope compass measured parcels. But there are a few plots also in some of these surveys that were unmeasured, and we also try to control for that. So this should give actually reliable estimates of reported parcels. But what we find is actually variation in reported parcels within households over years. So that's the main driver of the issue, and I think it's an overlooked issue. It's not easy to discover when you work on a single survey round, because this is not known and it's very hard to identify. So it's only when we start pooling balanced samples that we can start looking at this variation in degree of reporting of parcels within households. And actually, what we found is that this parcel alteration can lead to downward bias 20 to 40% of average or median farm sizes in these 2 countries. So, and we find the bias is substantial across both countries, across survey rounds, across all regions in those countries. We also find that this non-classical measurement error problem contributes to an upward bias in Gini coefficients that varies quite a bit, but it's also substantial because of some parts of the sample have a lot more dropout of parcels in some years, and that tends to increase the farm size variation. So what I ended up with to make things quick is the most reliable ownership holding size of a household is the maximum size we find within the 3 or 4 rounds. That size is least likely to suffer from parcel attrition. But it could be, it's not a perfect measure either, because there may have been some bequest or inheritance, bequest or, Ethiopia don't have sales of land. In Malawi, you can have sales, etc. But we also look at various ways of estimating this. But first, quickly, a theoretical framework. Of course, the real farm size changes are related to inheritance, bequest, purchase and sales, administrative expropriations, etc. Private land takings or losings could also be there. But what I think is more important actually relates to a couple of the first factors here. It relates to your challenge also of renting land. I think it also has similar implications. So farmers may have incentives to under-report parcels. We know that these are those who have carried out these surveys and tried to measure plots know how heavy work it is. I've been climbing up to 3,000–4,000 meters above sea level, trying to do this also in Ethiopia, in fragmented holdings, in this difficult topography. So it's a lot of hard work, both for farmers and also enumerators to go around and do this. So I think there can be pollution and incentives to under-report. I think there is very little incentive to over-report because it's a lot of extra work. You don't want to pretend you own plots you don't have, because also all the extra work and that could also create other social conflicts. Surveys also tend, because they also are constrained by time and resources, etc., to focus on the main large nearby parcels, and you may have to leave out small parcels or faraway parcels. And rented out parcels are also more likely to be left out from surveys, as such parcels are not managed by the household. So it may not directly give income unless there is sharecropping, which could be the case also, of course, which also makes it income relevant. But still, they may be not reported or under-reported. Over the rounds, we may also have improved technologies like we have discussed here also, of course. So we may see improvements in this over survey round. So that's also what we try to look into in our assessment of the data. So, but there are some limitations with these data also, which make us unable to really test every theoretical proposition. So we need to go for a kind of second best approach. LSC data are incomplete with respect to parcel transfers and timing of such transfers. So we cannot really dig into every detail of change from year to year. And the moral hazard problems related to attrition is also not easily observable. So we tested out different alternative estimators with the best variables we found in the data to kind of predict various type of variations in VC. Actually, as a starting point, we use maximum within household farm size over years as the benchmark. And we try to understand and estimate the difference from that within each survey round and also explain those differences econometrically. So the Ethiopian panel with 3,300 something households repeatedly in 3 rounds. So it's only a 4-year period. How much variation in ownership holding do you expect in a 4-year period in a country where you don't have sales or purchases, or at least unless they are illegal? So how much inheritance do you have in 4 years? So maximum ownership holding size is what is the kind of benchmark, and these are there could be some outlier problem, and we cut off that with winterizing the data. So here is also winterization of data at 1% level compared to also within round the farm sizes are about 1.1 hectares, while the mean maximum holding over survey rounds is almost half a hectare larger. Median also, big difference. Gini coefficients tend to go down. And this was the kind of way I started graphing to really get the idea of the size of the problem, because I created the holding size, ownership holding size in each year as a share of maximum holding size over the 3 survey rounds in Ethiopia. And this is the distribution I found for the first survey round 2012. So here, these are the share that had the maximum farm size in this year. And then the shrinking size down to 0 are the others. And we have tried to winterize to deal with outliers on both sides. But this doesn't really, this pattern is really stable and cannot be explained by outliers. And if you go look at 2014, you see here the bigger share was there in 2014, which may be an effect of data quality improvement, because otherwise with wealth and dividing land between children, etc., you should expect biggest land perhaps in the first year if farm sizes are gradually shrinking over time. So we kind of find the opposite pattern, which may be data quality issue. And then we look at the parcels and number of parcels. So of course, we have a lot of fragmented holdings in Ethiopia. So the blue line here is the cumulative probability of different number of parcels of households. And then we constructed a variable within household deviation from maximum number of parcels reported by the household. So also here we get the kind of idea of possible plot attrition that we also included then in regressions. And then we looked at this pattern over survey rounds also, and we see it's worse in 12 and kind of declining over survey rounds. So we see some improvement over time. Then we tried to estimate censored panel commit models, different estimators, also fractional commit panels, stochastics, frontier, etc., to see whether we could get some improvements with different estimators. Then using ownership holding shares as the dependent variable, so censored from above. And look at which variables could explain this. So we find, related to your paper also, that female-headed households and households without oxen, they report less. So they are less likely to report all their land. That's highly significant. We try to piece out inheritance or bequest by dividing the sample into age of head of household groups, but we didn't find, so it seems also inheritance bequest cannot really explain much of this either. We also look for land takings, etc., redistribution, but not much in this period either. So variables are, maybe quite big effects, but they are a tiny small share of the sample. And also get therefore very large confidence intervals. But then when we come to parcel attrition or deviation from maximum parcels, etc., we find strong negative effects that are really highly significant. We also see differences across regions and the big differences across survey rounds. So in short. But then I try to also predict ownership holding size based on these, and these are different predictions with different models. And the blue line here is the actual distribution. So after playing around with different econometric estimators to try to get this to fit better, I kind of ended up with these data limitations. We cannot tackle this well econometrically, so I ended up using the maximum ownership holding over years as the second best word proxy for farm size of the households in the sample. So I tried different estimators. I'm not going into details. See some differences between fractional profit or panel stochastic frontier, etc. Error distributions look bad. But then, so moving to using the maximum farm size and comparing with the actual farm size distribution within survey rounds. The red one here is the maximum size of households, and the blue one is the 2012 distribution. So the gap between these, I think, is a fairly good proxy of the degree of bias because of underreporting of parcels. And this is for each survey round. Then Malawi, we went through the same smaller sample, about almost 1,000 households per survey round. We have a bit longer time period, 2010 to 2019, which may allow more inheritance, etc. Also there, some more sales of land, perhaps. But we find very similar pattern in each survey round for shares. I was surprised to see how similar the things were, and also there trying intracing to see whether still with possible outliers, but the pattern is really stable. Looking at parcels and deviations also from maximum parcels reported, we find here also quite a lot of this deviation. And also every survey round we find that. Estimators, we find strong negative effects from deviation in plots. Also, well, we also have unmeasured plots, but there are few, so the standard errors are large, etc. But I can go also their estimators, same problem, they really cannot give us a good estimate. So again, I end up with the same kind of conclusion that the maximum farm size measured within households over the 4 rounds may be the best proxy we have. And if we compare here, farm size in each round for the households, 0.7 to 0.8, and maximum ownership holding 1.1. And if you look at the median, 0.5, 0.6, and 0.9, so substantially higher. Gini coefficients also tend to go down. And this is then also the similar pattern across survey rounds for maximum size versus within the round distribution. And also we see a substantial lower share of farms are below 1 hectare or below 2 hectare also in the sample with this approach versus using each round. And also we find variation across regions in Malawi, bigger gap in the north and in the central and the south. So yeah, some Gini's side we can stop there, but there are more of the issues perhaps for discussion. These are, GPS records, of course, are not publicly available. So follow-up work could, of course, for insiders to work on, to have some verification. I think also in Ethiopia, it's a good idea to cross-check with land registry data. Actually, our surveys, like panel surveys in Ethiopia, like in Tigray region, for example, we politely ask people or households to see their land certificate. So we copied into our records farm sizes from their land certificates. But we also went out and measured, particularly the first round land certification, we also measured parcels too, because also they use traditional methods, rope, etc., for measuring lots there. So they were also kind of inaccurate. In second land certification, now they have a certificate for each parcel, but also that information or matching with the land registries, if they can get the records there. I think it's also a good way to cross-check, perhaps to improve the data quality. But also, I think there may be interesting implications here for assessing issues like input use and productivity estimates. To what extent does parcel attrition or also affect reporting of input use or outputs? So it may have poverty implications or for poverty estimators. Are these inputs aggregated from plot parcel to household, or is there a cross-check, or is there first a question at the household level, how much inputs and how were they used on different parcels? Bias could go both ways depending on which way the logic is of cross-checking also of those data. And of course, land wells may be biased, perhaps total crop production. Yeah. And I think the fundamental problem of in actually collecting these data is likely to have impact on similar surveys in other countries also, because there is there are strong incentives to underreport, no incentives to overreport, so that creates this non-classical measurement error problem, which may be substantial, but perhaps vary also. Yeah. So I have the last conclusions, but that's up there.
All right. Let's take a round of questions of all three. Get your hand up first and back up.
Thank you. My name is Esteban Cabrera from FAO. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. So I have one quick clarification question. Is like, what's the definition of ownership that you're using? And linked to that, how much of this variation that we observe is actually due to like changes in the questionnaire designs across the years? That's one. And then another one is like, if you could elaborate on why do we look at just part operation, you know, like not ownership, but just land operated. And because I mean, you did the task of report on land inequality not only on own land but also operated. So we were counting on this service because there are, you know, African countries haven't undertaken censuses in that for 10 years. So we were counting on that. So that case.
I'm seeing if there's a new hand here. You were up next, so we'll do that. And please, you can.
Yeah, no, so I have a little bit related to that. So also the round, we always talk about survey fatigue. I give you a lot of information around parcels already in the last 3 months. So I think that maybe you try to have maybe more around to help you. I'm not sure. More measurement error. So I think maybe one to also explore along that. Maybe next 2 years actually very accurate. Then we can go. And also your finding is that shoe is going up, but does that mean that, I just want to get a better understanding. Smaller farmers say more under report, right?
Okay, let's take one more question. Carl, I'm going to let you connect afterwards and why don't you raise your question?
Yeah, it's a very small question. One question is related to the person inside the house, there's influence, it's not saying, oh, the 3 or 4 surveys. Did you look at that? Is it possible to extend that a little?
Perfect. 3 questions, why don't you take a crack and we have an extra minute.
Yeah, going into land renting, as I said, I think there are limitations in LSM, but they're not really designed to carefully map the land rental market. So in Ethiopia, there were some changes in the earlier rounds. They didn't ask explicitly about sharecropping, and they didn't think that renting was also implicating sharecropping. But most farmers in Ethiopia distinguish land renting from sharecropping. So that could be one reason for underreporting, which may have improved after they also in the last round included sharecropping more explicitly. So there could be changes in the way questions were asked, like that also. But ownership holding and how it's defined, it's in Ethiopia, you typically, about 50% here have land certificates, and that documents that you're kind of, the state owns, but you're really having the strong user right for the land. So it's seen as kind of ownership holding of the households, that they are in possession of it and they decide, but it also ties them to the land. If you're leaving community for a long time, they make the state may take it without compensation. So there are some restrictions on the land rights in Ethiopia. Malawi is a bit, it's more within the customary tenure system. So it's, but also there typically land is allocated to households within the clan. So it's also there fairly clear who or which family owns a specific area of land.
And did you want to try any the changing respondent comment? Or?
I really don't know that. Maybe other experts, but I think there are issues related to. You may be able to test this also. I suspect there are enumerator biases involved in this because I think some of them may be more tempted to leave out parcels than others. So it could be one thing that I would suspect substantial enumerator fixed effects in this. Yeah.
And the comment was actually about the respondent, the survey respondent itself.
Yeah, that's also, but it's we don't know that. So
yeah. We'll do another round.
I have to jump to another meeting soon, but I wanted to just briefly chime in. So just very quickly on the respondent effects. We identify our respondents in survey modules, so you can actually find them in the data and you can actually check us. Right. And one of the issues here is that, I mean, particularly in the case of Malawi, when you say balanced household animal sample, that's an arbitrary definition you have imposed on the data set itself. Because in Malawi, we don't actually have a household panel sample. We track individuals and then we bring in their households every round. So if you look at the data set, it's like an infinite contingent model. The household sample is expanding over time as a function of who you track. So when you say the balanced household panel sample, this refers to the respondent selection comment. Depending on like how you actually define your balanced panel, you may actually not find the same respondent because it may very well be different. And I think this is one of the issues here with the sample and its implications for your analysis, which I think is a longer discussion, but it really is relevant for this because we're not necessarily tracking holdings and we're not tracking households. We're tracking individuals and then the holdings and the households kind of appear around that in the way in which we implement the survey, right? So it's kind of an important conceptual kind of differentiation. And the other thing I would say is that, in Malawi in particular, there's an interesting feature of a parcel panel. So we implement the survey trying to feed forward parcels for them to actually identify exactly whether they are in control of that parcel, whether they're farming it. So you actually have, in the case of Malawi, you can dig deep a lot more than Ethiopia because of this, like questions you're interested around, over time within, say, household variation, like parcels, what is omitted, what is not listed. So there's actually quite a bit more data that you can dig into a little bit to further buttress like some of your findings. But and then I have some other questions, and I think that will be a longer meeting, just around, yeah. But thank you, yeah. And this definitely was not something that has been on our radar, so I appreciate it. Thanks.
Did I see a new hand in back from anyone? I'm sort of purposely looking for people who haven't asked questions before, but Sydney, you haven't asked a question. Go ahead.
This is actually more of a clarification question for the potentially comment task. But in Ethiopia, it seems, is it correct, the correct interpretation that in the latest round in your sample, there you had the most parcels reported in terms of number of parcels? The majority of households were reporting the max number.
It was quite close. I don't remember exactly now, but the 2014, 2016 were not that different.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems maybe this. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it seemed like maybe the parcel count was not necessarily decreasing, like attrition of parcels themselves from this. But I wonder also if there's some element of change in measurement method. I mean, you talked about the measurement method. So I think in Ethiopia, if I recall, they kind of phased in GPS use in one region. I mean, I wonder if there's anything there when you're thinking about the size of the holding. Again, instead of the parcel count. Maybe there's not as much intentional or unintentional attrition of the parcels reported.
I think there seem to be some data quality improvements from 2012 to 14. 16, yeah. At least the number of reported parcels.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I think, and I haven't seen anything doing that. One thing that I was wondering was how much of this is a problem to descriptive evidence and how much of it is a problem to statistical inference, right? I mean, think of, for example, if an enumerator is simply dropping some parcels whenever he gets tired and then he does it in a random way, this is a problem for descriptive evidence, right? But it might not be a big problem for statistical inference. So I was wondering if it's possible to test who is more likely to drop parcels at the household level, and then you run another function of the different overwhelms, and then that's a clear way of testing whether the measurement here is classical or non-classical, right? So that would allow to say, okay, if we can show, for example, if we can show, okay, farmers with large farm size are more likely to have a large number of active plots. It means that it's the is classical, right? And then you clearly say, okay, it will affect just not the descriptive evidence we can provide, but also whatever regression we can run using this data. I don't know if that's possible, but one way to test that could be have an outcome of attrition of alpha and run that as a function.
Could be also included there, attempted, but of course we don't know the correct for certain, but we assume that at least the one with the most parcels and biggest land has less of this problem. But even there, got the comment from Chris Barrett also that, yeah, you cannot assume this is even an upper bound of farm size because particularly if they are renting out land in small survey rounds, they may still under report also, so the maximum also may be too low for them.
But for others, they may have big wetted land, so there the maximum is too high on average. So yeah, the bias could go both ways for this one also. So it's only a proxy, and one may have to really dig deeper into the data, and maybe you have to look at the data household by household to really fine tune and get them a better proxy. I'm not sure you can solve it econometrically with the limitations of the variables here.
Okay, let's shift to our last paper today, addressing soil quality data gaps with imputation, evidence from Ethiopia and Uganda. It's a paper co-authored with a set of authors from the World Bank's Living Standards Measurement Study team. The presenter today is Haiyan Deng. He's a senior economist at the World Bank, a member of the LSMS team, and he's also co-editor of the Review of Development Economics.
Thank you, Lisa. Very nice introduction. Okay, and yes, no, I mean, thank you all for staying until now. I mean, just before lunch, and well, I will try to be quick. Yeah, so in fact, our presentation, like very much used on, because the previous papers presentation that you see here today, and in particular, like we build our paper also, related to the theme of, measurement error, but more like in a more perhaps like in a broader way is that most of the time we don't even have the data. Right? Say for example, we want to collect a good soil quality data, but like sometimes as Sydney points out, it can be expensive, and we don't collect the data as frequently as we would like to. Yeah. So what should we do then? Yeah. So this is to work with our collection of bank, zero collectors here and here. Okay, so yes, so maybe well, you already know, perhaps most of you already know better than us, but basically for soil quality data, especially for lower income country, we don't have a lot of data. Right? I mean, because of the US have been implementing like a soil quality survey for the past century or so. But for poorer countries, that's a very expensive, and very few poor countries can do like the large scale survey. And most of the surveys that we see are like a smaller scale. Right? And yes, and at the same time, also we know that the literature have developed quite well now. And we see that very weak, even very weak correlation between subjective assessment of soil quality and objective measurements, and especially for poorer countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, right? And many other countries. Yes, so that's a big challenge. If we don't rely on collecting data on subjective self-assessment from traditional household surveys. And then at the same time, now we also see, the arrival, of publicly available and very large scale, data sets that are generated by, models, right, by big data, by satellite data such as soil grid and IFCDA soils. And then the publicly available data sets, are very useful because they provide, like a measure of soil quality, down to the, grid level, right, down to very, like a very disaggregated level. So that's very encouraging news. But at the same time, like as also Sydney pointed out a bit, in the earlier presentation. For now, like we don't really know, how well the large scale publicly available data set compared with the objective laboratory measurements, the benchmark measurements that we can have. So yes, so for us, we try to address the challenges, and in particular, we employ data imputation methods to try to fill in missing data gaps and try to evaluate whether we can improve on missing data soil quality. Yes. So for multiple imputation, it will be the main techniques that we are using in this paper. But then we also supplementing it with some common, machine learning techniques. And the key idea, like behind imputation is that say, we are given, a smaller, benchmark, very high quality, survey on soil quality, right? And then, we can think about how we can combine this smaller survey with a larger survey, that have either low quality or, that have no data at all, right, on soil quality. Or even, like a more recent data set, that don't have, the benchmark data that we are looking for. So the idea that, we can use imputation methods to combine, the smaller survey with benchmark soil quality data with the larger survey with either with no data or with very low quality, soil quality data to generate, like imputed estimates. So, and then we also compare, the imputed estimate, with the soil risk and ISCD soil quality data. And we also try to understand, whether we can try to improve, on the quality of the available, large scale data sets. And also we also to analyze, like what are the appropriate, sample sizes, right, that we can use, like for the benchmark survey and also for the target survey to implement imputation. And the question, have a practical relevance for survey design, right? Because if we understand well about the sample sizes, right, for the benchmark survey, then we can save on costs. Say, for example, instead of, implementing data collection on 1,000 households, right? Maybe we only need to collect data on, say, 300 households, and basically we can cut costs, significantly. Okay, so that a very quick preview of the finding is that, first off, we find, very big and statistical significantly differences between the benchmark, soil quality data and the publicly available large-scale data sets such as ISDA and SOGIS. And then our second finding is that we also find that the imputed estimate, can approximate, reasonably well, the distribution of the benchmark soil quality measures. And here we look at several indicators of soil quality, for example, pH level, soil organic carbon or nitrogen, soil texture, and so on. And then when we bring in machine learning techniques, we also find that, the techniques, also work well, but mostly for the mean, but not really for the whole distribution on the soil quality indicator. And we also find some initial evidence that, imputation techniques, can be used to improve on the quality of the publicly available data sets. For that, we're still looking more into that. And for sample sizing, so we find out that sample sizing, it can vary depending on the country context, and it can range, anywhere, between, like roughly, 350 plus for Uganda to almost about 600 plus, for Ethiopia for the benchmark survey. For the target survey, we have a somewhat lower numbers. Okay, so maybe I can skip on some of that background material, but basically, as you know, in Ethiopia and Uganda, on the country, are faced with challenges of soil quality degradation over time, right? So, so monitoring soil quality is very important for poorer countries. Yes. So for the data, well, I mean, a lot of details about the data. If you need a better person answer question about the data, and here, but basically, there are a few. The main key takeaway point is that here we have a benchmark survey. We have two benchmark surveys, right? As I mentioned, smaller survey with very high quality data on soil quality, right? Two benchmark survey in Ethiopia and Uganda, and then two benchmark surveys, and then we look at several soil quality indicators, like pH level, nitrogen, soil texture, right? And we also constructed, an overall soil quality index, so that we can capture, try to capture different aspects of soil quality. And then we, for the target survey, the survey that we want to view into, right? Here, we look at the LSMS, ISA survey, right? The same survey that our colleague, analyzed in a previous paper. So for that, we look at the Ethiopian, the way through of the Ethiopian socio-economic surveys, and we look at the Uganda, the round 5, the Uganda National Panel surveys. And then, when we try to link up, the target survey, the benchmark survey, remember that the benchmark survey, smaller survey, right? So each in the benchmark and the target survey, we look at the overlapping region, which we call the benchmark sample, right? And then we also look at the other non-overlapping, regions, which we call the non-benchmark samples. And the reason we do that is that, we want to minimize, the differences, any artificial, differences, created by, by the sample design, between, the two different, samples. So ideally, the benchmark sample, is more similar, to the benchmark, survey, to the benchmark data, right? And the non-benchmark sample, overall they are similar, but they are slightly different, right? Because of course, from the same country but different region. And then finally, it's the last sort of data sort is publicly available, large scale data sort that I just mentioned, soil grid and HDR, right? And for that, well, I mean, maybe if you use it, then that they are like the both detailed, data, at the grid level, that we have available now. Okay, so so now going directly into the estimates, and basically here in this table, we just compare, the distribution, like the mean of the benchmark data, right? The benchmark survey, the laser, and the maps for Ethiopia and Uganda, right? On the left, on the third column, see for the laser, right? And then we compare, with the ISCDA soil data, right? And then the soil grid data. And as you can see, when we go look at the means, there are some big differences, right? And they are strongly, particularly significant, of the 1% level. So basically here, we show in the appendix, on the mean value here. To make it simpler, we just show the mean for the last study, and then we show the differences, right? And as you can see, all of them are different, both for the different soil quality indicators and also for the overall soil quality, overall soil index. So basically, it is saying that, when we look at the benchmark data, then we do see that, there are very much room for improvement, with on the large scale publicly available data. And the same reason that we have for Ethiopia and Uganda, I mean across all the different indicators in the index. Okay, so analytical framework. Okay, so maybe I will go skip over it, so then I can go to the reason, given the lack of time. But basically, as I mentioned, multiple imputation is the main method that we are using. And then, it's it has been widely used, in many different disciplines now, right? And here we are using the predictive mean matching. It's more like a non-parametric, multiple imputation. And then we also bring in some common machine learning technique like a lasso, elastic net, and then for Robinit checks. Okay, so going to the reasons here basically here, we are again, the first column for Ethiopia is a benchmark data, right? And then the second column is an imputed estimate, where basically here, we impute, right, from the benchmark data into the LSMS, IRA survey, right, the ESS2. And here you can see, the bow numbers. That means the imputed estimate from inside the 95% confidence interval, of the two of the benchmark rates. And if there is super steep I, that means that it even, the estimate even from inside the standard error, of the benchmark, numbers. So basically here, basically the takeaway point, the main takeaway point, from this table is that, with the imputed estimate, we can do pretty well, compared to the actual, benchmark result. Here, as you can see here, even though it's not significant, but in terms of the point estimate, right, it's not identical. But statistically speaking, it's not significant, but overall, practically speaking, the economic magnitude, is very good, if we look at that. And here, of course, we also use a linear regression method with multiple imputation. Yes, and then we also have a slightly good result, but still, reasonably well. And then for the next figure, here is another figure where we summarize all the estimate. And here, we look at the ratio between the multiple imputation, imputed estimate, and then we divided it by the two number, right? And so ratio one means that become very close. So what I have for to the benchmark estimate. But then if we look at again if we look at the publicly available large scale data sets, and you see that ratio, right? It fluctuates quite a bit, ranging say from about 0.5 to even 2.3. That means basically that's the bias, which is publicly available, data sources, in the benchmark data, even up to three times, difference, right? And that compares, with our imputed result. Our imputed result, the ratio is about what? So that compares, very favorably, compared to the other estimates. Okay, and then for the next step is that now we are looking at the whole distribution, right? Not at the mean, but now we are looking at the imputed estimate for the 10 percentile, 25th percentile, and so on, right? And here, we map out, on the soil depth, on the soil quality indicators, and our estimate as a bow line, right? The bow, solid line, and the gray area back width is at the 95% of the two leg. And here you can see that overall, it's not perfect, but overall, I estimate, over, from inside, 95% comfortable, for the whole distributions, of all the different indicators. And we have the same result, for Ethiopia and Uganda. And so we actually, are very encouraged with the course, yes. And here's some result with machine learning. We also have good result with machine learning, but not as good. So we stick with multiple imputation. And here, maybe here, okay. So here it's like here it's like another novelty check test. When we are imputing and we compare it. For the. But maybe let me skip over it and go to the map, which is more interesting. Yeah. Okay, so for the map, here, here's a publicly available large scale data set, as you mentioned, can be down to the grid level. So when we bring in the zip files, of course we can plot it, at the district level, for Uganda. Yeah. So that is like what we can do. You easily do, right? By downloading a publicly available data set. Or ISB and some data, so that's what we have. Yeah. But now, if we bring in multiple imputation estimate, we try to improve, right, on the maps, and you can see right here. Overall, we see that the quality, basically, the quality of the soil data, slightly, less, right? No, not slightly, but overall they are less. When we bring in the MI estimate, the multiple imputation estimate. And you can see all the colors here, right? They become lighter, something like overall, we see like an adjustment for all the different districts, for Uganda. And we also see very similar pattern, when we use machine learning, here we don't use last next, right? So basically, we see a lot of consistency between multiple imputation estimate and machine learning estimates, and all these, are systematically, lighter color, that what we have available, with the ISD and scientific data. Yeah. So basically, if you believe in the imputation method and on our result, up to this point, basically it's showing that here we are showing some improved, versions, of the soil quality map. So overall, yes, yes. And then for Ethiopia, we are still working on it. We have some issue with the set file and so on. So we are, now finalizing it. But basically, we also see some systematic differences, for Ethiopia also. So yeah. Okay. So and then finally, the last set of result is in terms of sample size. So here, is like some simulation. All the number that you see here, are the sample size, right? So here like the 10%, 20%, all the way to 100%. And here we are looking at percentage of the benchmark sample, right? Again, the idea that we want to understand. Let us say, for example, instead of collecting data on 1,000, household the benchmark sample, what if we just cut down and we collect data on 300 households only, right? To save cost. Yes. Okay. Yes. And then what we find out is that. So basically, we get some number, and here, the number fluctuate, but it's stable, it's stabilizing around, like, around 500, 600 or so. Okay, so very quickly, coming to the conclusion, our findings spread up multiple imputation and to some degree, machine learning methods, can help us deal with like a missing data gap. If we can use some benchmark survey, right, for Ethiopia and Uganda, and we even, find out imputation, can help improve, the publicly available large-scale data sets, that are available, out there, right? And in terms of sample sizing, we have some number, for the sample sizing, fluctuating around 500 or 400 depending on the country. But like these and the detail, can be useful, if we want to implement, future, like the survey results. And last, imputation, actually it's not, it's very straightforward to do, like basically, like only thing, we do it in data, and, very standard, like modeling framework, that we can apply. Thank you.
All right, let's see if we can pull 2 or 3 questions together here. I'll make a quick comment maybe while people are thinking here, but I'm oftentimes intrigued by how people who seem resistant to imputation methods are completely fine with machine learning methods, and it makes no sense to me at all. But I think that could be a potential hook here that in your paper as well, just sort of expand the crowd of try to persuade some of the imputation critics, I suppose, just by sort of illustrating, look, it's very similar results coming in here, but Cindy.
One comment, because I think in the Q&A after my presentation, there was a question about substitution of methods versus comparability or complementarity. And I think I focused too much on the linear, but this is a clear example of how some indicator of soil health can be complementary to geospatial methods. So I think these objective measures, I think, are substitutes, but this is a good example also because of the subjective questions on soil health can be factoring into kind of this modeling. So just to highlight this is another example.
Just comments. I think knows how imputation exactly that, but I feel so how this can, so it's more about the overall profile of the soil quality, not very micro scale, depending on how large you can represent, because so you see 350 plots, what does it mean for Uganda? Is that 350 plots? Out of the sample in the survey, most 350 plots can really enough for say something about the country. So I think feel a little less clear. Of course, for us more study and use the micro data to do analysis. We want to have households, even same household, different heavy security and different land quality. So for this kind of things, application is the limit. Right? But I know the method, but then earlier still is more micro level than just so it's more general comments.
In the spirit of a general comment, I'll pose a general comment, but I'll be curious if you thought much about it since you've done a lot of work on the imputation side. I can see just a ton of value in. I'm a big believer in this sort of imputation method for filling data gaps, but I see a ton of value in terms of imputing important indicators of soil quality in this into data sources, particularly when the primary use isn't for someone who wants to make an exact statement about soil quality, but wants to control for soil quality as in some sort of multivariate analysis of a sort. But I guess one comment would just be if, as you're writing this, you're commenting on the distinction between this thing as a covariate as opposed to the primary indicator. But then the other comment is when these things are imputation approaches and they're being used as, if they are being later used as covariates, having to think about the standard errors for those things must just be an incredible headache because they're going to be correlated with many things that presumably are already in the model, but not sort of explicitly incorporated. But is that something, I assume that's outside the scope of this paper, but is that something in general? Is there an imputation literature that says later on when you use these things, this is the appropriate way to use these if you're using them as controls to account for sampling variation that you would normally expect?
Yeah. No, thank you. It's great. Yeah, it's very relevant. Your comment. Thank you, Lee. Yes. Okay, so I mean, for the multiple imputation techniques, like as I mentioned, it's a big statistic literature, on that. So indeed, as you said, like the multiple imputation, it can be used in different way, right? So here we just show the reason when we try to impute soil quality as the outcome variable. Indeed, as you said, it can also be used, as a covariate, in some regression framework. How to do that? In fact, for with multiple imputation, they have to adjust for the standard errors. And the good news is that, it's done automatically, like it already coded, everything is data, we can use this. But the thing is that, we have to, make all the assumption, right? And well, on a related note, indeed, as you said, some well-known a lot. Many researchers, many economists, well-known economists are still like resistant, to the idea of bringing multiple imputation. For example, very well-known econometrics and Chakramasky, right? He even have a recent paper in the Journal of Labor Economics, discussing that here, when economists, when we bring in multiple imputation, we have to worry a lot about all the underlying, assumptions. Yeah. So essentially, as you said, okay, here we can use covariates, we can use it in further subsequent regression, but exactly whether our assumption can help, right? But indeed, that is very promising for future research because now, I mean, when it's like the first phase, right? Second phase, we can also think about how once we have only predicted, soil quality the data, and seeing that, we think that it have reasonable quality, right? And how do we do that, right? And let us say to plug it into the production function, right? Or maybe to look at the linkage with poverty, other outcomes variable. So that can be like this direction for future research. Yeah. And yes, and that related to something question is that indeed, another thing that we want to do is like in terms of cost benefit analysis, like with all the number of households. Okay, so maybe we can push it one step further, right? And we can try to calculate and write some cost number, when we do a survey, right? So presumably, if you Sydney, I mean, you are on top of that, and if we can do some quick calculation, to see how much saving, that we can have, right? I mean, with different sample sizes and then actually use.
Great. So I might bring this to a close here today. So thanks so much to the presenters for a fascinating set of papers, and thanks for a lively discussion.
Thank you.